that health, obviously very, very important issue in the NHS, is always an important issue, but are we sure, is it an election swinger? Is it an issue that determines an election?
I think this is what Labour are hoping it is. My question about this is, I think that the privatisation thing is a bit of a red herring. I don't mean the increase in private sector contracts under this government. The rate of increase hasn't been much faster than it was under the last Labour government.
Slower.
Indeed. And the Tories are pledged to put more money into the NHS. I think they will find it difficult to make this issue determine the election in the way that they want it to.
OK. Before I come to you, Polly, we've actually, you see, one of our viewers has found Andy Burnham, and there he is in front of our camera. Mr. Burnham, welcome to the Daily Politics. I'm glad we got a hold of you. I know you've got a busy morning, so let's get stuck into it. Why do you think, in the latest of the well-regarded tracker series that look at public attitudes to the NHS, your government used them, your Labour used them when you were in government, why do you think dissatisfaction with the NHS is now at its lowest level ever?
But there is still huge public support for the NHS, Andrew, and it still provides a good service in many cases, but too often now it's failing people. We've seen in the last year the NHS miss its A&E target. It will not hit it in the last year of this government. And as I've said to you before, A&E is the classic barometer of the whole health and care system. If there are problems anywhere in that system, it shows up as pressure in A&E. And the fact that they are now missing that target and will miss it for this year tells you that the NHS is now going backwards and patients are waiting longer to be seen, not just in A&E, for GP services, for ambulances to arrive. The NHS is going backwards on this government's watch, as the King's Fund confirmed yesterday.
But why then, to put it the other way, if that is the case, and this poll was only done recently, why is satisfaction with the NHS at its second highest level in recorded history?
Well, Andrew, let's remember what happened. This government inherited from the last government, of which I was a part, the lowest ever waiting lists and the highest ever levels of public satisfaction in the NHS.
But this poll is from the end of last year, after you'd said the NHS
doing
was
a
in
good job.
crisis.
Staff are working flat out. But if you're saying there are not real problems out there in the NHS, then I'm afraid you're simply out of touch with the reality patients are facing. They are ringing the surgery in the morning, trying to get a GP appointment and being told nothing is available for days. They are turning up at A&E and waiting longer to be seen. Cancer patients are waiting longer for treatment to start. Of course, the NHS is still doing its best in trying circumstances, but the evidence is all around us that the NHS is heading backwards on David Cameron's watch. And as I said, the authoritative King's Fund confirmed that yesterday.
If you look at the rate of outsourcing to private health providers by the NHS, still free at the point of use and so on, if you look at that, in the last 5 years of Labour government, the rate of outsourcing was twice as high as it's been under the 5 years of this coalition government. Do you regret that?
I'm sorry, it's increased hugely under this government. There's been a 40% increase. The Prime Minister confirmed last night there'd been an increase, but he didn't.
But the rate of increase was twice as fast in the last 5 years of Labour government.
There's a very big difference, Andrew, in terms of how we use the private sector and how this government is using the private sector in the NHS. Let me explain that difference. We brought the private sector in to bring waiting lists down, to add capacity so we could bring those waiting lists down to the lowest ever levels. This government came in without a mandate from the public. It brought through a policy of mandating all NHS services out to the market. And the BMJ found recently that 1 in 3 services are now going out to the private sector. And that change hasn't yet been picked up in the figures that Mr Cameron quoted last night. Nobody gave this Prime Minister their permission to put the National Health Service up for sale. It must be an issue at this election because he did it without a mandate last time, and this time he's going to have to account for that policy before the British people.
Yes, but you see, you had made huge inroads into the waiting list by 2005, 2006, and yet you still went for the fastest rate of outsourcing in your final 4 years as a government. So that doesn't really square with what you've just said. You increased the rate of outsourcing the longer you were in power.
let me say what happened, Andrew. We brought the private sector in to add capacity and bring waiting lists down. But
You'd already done that
as health secretary. You might remember I did it in 2009 because I believed it was time to call time on the market experiment in the NHS. I have said before that I thought it was allowed in too far. I believe in the public NHS, in an NHS that puts people before profits. And I will make that argument, have made that argument consistently. So these aren't easy words from opposition going into an election campaign. I changed policy as Health Secretary towards NHS as the preferred provider. The leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband, has confirmed that policy today. That is the policy on which this Labour Party now fights the coming general election. And I believe that's the policy that the British people believe in. You remember, don't you, the NHS celebrated here at the opening ceremony of our Olympic Games. What was Danny Boyle celebrating there? A health service that puts people before profits. Well, the party that created the NHS in the last century firmly believes in that principle, and we stand proudly behind it today as we launch our election campaign.
You've got this Labour poster saying that the Tories would cut the NHS to the bone. You've even got a picture or an X-ray of a bone doing it. But that's just scaremongering, isn't it? Under the coalition, spending on health has gone up by 4% in real terms. And it's promised to ring fence in real terms spending again for the next government. Why would a government that's already done that and promising to do the same again, why would it cut the NHS to the bone? You can argue they should spend more, but saying it would cut to the bone is just Labour propaganda, isn't it?
Certainly not. Because let's look back at what's happened in this Parliament, Andrew. I warned at the very beginning of this Parliament that care cuts would cause an NHS crisis, that it's no good saying you'll protect the NHS if the way you pay for that is by slashing councils and slashing social care. But that is exactly what this government has done. And those care cuts are the root cause of the A&E crisis that we now see in the National Health Service. Cuts to social care, care cuts, are in effect NHS cuts. And as we've seen after the recent budget, the OBR has said that public services will be on a roller coaster in the first 2 years if the Tories get back in. What they mean by that is there will be a big dip in spending, big cuts for councils. And I put it to you that that won't just give us an A&E crisis, that will throw the whole of the NHS into crisis if this government were to get back in.
Final question for you. You've pledged to spend, your party has, an extra 2.5 billion on the NHS. You're going to pay that for that on the mansion tax and in closing tax loopholes. But of course, you won't get the mansion tax from day one, and you won't get tax loopholes money for day one either. So where will you get the extra money for 2015 and 16 and maybe even 17? Where will that come from?
Well, the money will start flowing immediately, and
well, it can't flow from loopholes immediately.
Granted, I accept that, but Ed Balls has said that he will bring these measures in with immediate effect. So the money will start flowing to the National
So what's
Health
the first tax loophole you'll close?
What's the first tax loophole you'll close down? The NHS will have a very serious deficit.
What's the first tax loophole you close down?
I couldn't. But we've got 3 policies that we are going to introduce.
No, I know. What's the first loophole?
To allow funding to flow to the National Health Service.
Well, since you think you get the money right away, what's the first tax loophole you'll close down?
And we will close the tax loophole used by hedge funds to avoid stamp duty. Now, those are the 3 measures that we have said that we will introduce immediately to get the money flowing to the National Health Service. You remember the Prime Minister fought the last election saying he cut the deficit, not the NHS. Well, we found out yesterday that he's created a large deficit in the NHS, over £500 million. So the money will need to flow straight away, but Ed Balls has given that clear commitment. The measures will come in straight away and the NHS will start to benefit straight away.
Andy Burnham, thanks for joining us this morning. Good to talk to you. Polly, we didn't get a chance to get a reaction from you before we went to the Shadow Health Secretary. What are your thoughts on this Labour approach to the NHS? Interesting that Mr Miliband should choose it to be the subject as he launches the campaign.
Well, it's Labour's winning topic. Labour created it, the Tories opposed it at the time. It's always been...
No, they did not.
Well,
the Tories did not oppose it. They only opposed it when Nye Bevan decided to nationalise the hospitals. Up until then, they voted
the hospitals,
Labour.
that's true. I think that Labour thinks it's its great winner. They know that the NHS is under intense pressure. It's quite interesting that polling figure you showed of people's high rate of satisfaction. The pollsters are now saying that they think when people are asked, how do you think the NHS is doing,